would that go with the western side?
Oh, look, I don't know how you'd work that out. Somebody would have a formula for working that out, because
Yeah,
there is a considerable amount of money in that fund, and they probably, based on population, would take a percentage of it.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Galen, that's something we covered, and we haven't got a formula per se, but the principle is that if you paid a targeted rate and then you end up in a different entity, then that targeted rate that you paid should end up with you.
Yes.
Now, the little asterisk on that, of course, is that that they may want to talk about, well, hang on, we've been taking turns at big projects and you just had yours and we haven't had it, whatever. There'll be some internal discussion just for sanity and common sense, but the principle is that, your rate should stay with you.
Okay. Thank you.
That's the basis of how I view it anyway. Have you got any other apologies for today?
Yes, we have. Submitter number 2046 at 1:20 p.m. Amelia Moana has withdrawn.
Okay. Right. Just makes it easier for me to operate, because if I know that they're not going to show up, and that just if we, like yesterday, one or two got an extra minute sort of thing. I don't mind if there's a bit of slippage there on that sort of thing, but it helps if I know who's not going to show up.
And David White will be sharing his screen because he's got a presentation.
Okay. As long as he remembers to take it down when he leaves.
Yeah.
Alan, can I just correct something that I said yesterday?
Where are you? Oh, yes, no.
Yeah, so yesterday I cast aspersions on a staff member, and I did not intentionally mean to do that. And I had a phone call from that staff member last night, which I appreciated. And I had made a comment about about Galen giving advice, and now I inadvertently identified her. She was not the author of the comments that I acted on. So I am publicly making a comment here and apologising to Galen directly. I did so on the phone last night, and I appreciated her coming to me straight away. So thank you. The person that made the comment knows who they are, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Noel.
Thank you. They're not on the map. You'll let us know. Right, they're here now, Your Worship.
Oh, punctual, sort of like.
So councillors, Kate Rees, 2083, page 32.
Are you there, Kate?
Yes, I am.
Where are you? Oh, there you are. I had to look around the screen to find you. So, yeah, Alan Sanson, Kate. So, hey, look, you've got 10 minutes for your submission. So, firstly, can I say thank you for submitting to it? And in that 10 minutes, if you want to have some interaction with the councillors, you probably need to stop short of those 10 minutes. So for that, we'll take your submission as been read. I'm sitting here looking at it now. All the councillors sort of read it. So I'll let you lead off, and the next 10 minutes is all yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So my name's Kate Rees. I'm a sheep and beef farmer from the Wairamarama, just west of the Onewhiro village. I'm president of the Wairamarama Community Hall Committee and also president of the Onewhiro Amateur Swimming Club, so quite involved in our community. Thank you for taking the time to hear me speak to my submission. I appreciate the need to review the representation structure of the community boards and wards and support the overall vision. However, it's always a however, the manner in which the initial proposal has been delivered and the wording that's been used leaves a lot to be desired. With regards to the proposed changes to the Onewhiro Tuakau Community Board, I don't believe a robust solution has been provided in the proposal, or alternative to what's been suggested anyway. There's vague mention of forming a community committee or relying on existing community groups. Now, I understand there are established community committees in the Waikato that are proving effective liaisons between their respective communities and the council. And thanks to information provided by Carolyn Eyre, I appreciate the potential they have for fair and equitable geographical representation in our area as well. We've got quite a vast area, rural area to cover. However, there is a long-standing element of mistrust and a feeling of neglect in our community, rural community, and it hasn't been helped by the lack of information and the quality of the communication during the consultation period. Forming a community committee is not considered an option, especially by the older generation, just from past history with the council, not necessarily standing members. It's not considered an option because the council is not legally accountable to the committee. So yeah, there is a serious element of mistrust. Community groups are also not considered an option. I'm not sure, I don't know of any local groups that were consulted about the proposed changes. What kind of community groups did you have in mind? Our geographical area is so vast that you'd find it quite hard to find an existing group to effectively represent the area. And current effective, I say effective community groups have been already formed for a specific purpose. And we do have trouble sourcing volunteers as it is. So your rugby club, your swimming club, ratepayers, yeah, doesn't really fit the bill so far as we're concerned. So forming a new community board is our preferred solution, even though in the proposal, ironically states that community boards reflect the urban bound communities of interest and don't cross general ward urban boundaries. I'm not quite sure where that statement's come from because it conflicts with information that was provided in the Reshape Waikato frequently asked questions. So yeah. Alternatively, if we're not able to form our own community board, we'd be happy to stick with the status quo. So the Onewhiro Tuakau Community Board. The proposal suggests that there's segregation and difference already, but we actually have a lot of common facilities and services, a lot in common. Schools as well. Kids cross the Tuakau Bridge to Tuakau College, and kids from Tuakau come up to Onewhiro Area School. So Tuakau is our closest township for farming supplies as well. So we actually have a lot in common with Tuakau, and we're quite happy to continue with the current arrangement. Yeah, even though it looks like there's a desire to split, and I can understand with population numbers how that drives that as well, and also have recent population numbers and kind of extrapolated numbers come into account as well. I understand the numbers came from 2020, but there's been a population explosion in like Pokeno, Tuakau, subdivisions going up in Onewhiro. So obviously this will have an effect as well. Yeah, so we're quite keen to stick with the status quo. Yeah, and that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you for your time. Have you got any questions to ask to clarify?
Yeah, probably only one question. I've asked a number of submitters from up your way that have actually raised the point around thinking there is some responsibility under council to recognise a community board versus a community committee. The only obligation a council has in relation to a community board is provided secretarial services, do its agenda, and provide a staff member. Well, even that is not required to attend a meeting. It's just something that we actually do. So this perception around a legal responsibility just doesn't exist in the same respect as perhaps it's been interpreted. So I just want to burst that misnomer around that thing. And look, I'm not saying I don't support you having a community board, but I'm just saying that a number of people said we've got a legal requirement to negotiate with the community board. Well, we've got a legal requirement to negotiate with everybody, not just a community board, community committees as well. So we don't treat them any differently, a board, and then we do a committee. So
Okay.
Yeah. So just realise that there's no status, there's no power, there's no nothing that goes with a community board. The people seem to think.
Right. I know. Unfortunately, that's how it's been communicated, and I understand we had an extraordinary meeting a few months ago, in which, in the minutes of the meeting, it said that it was important to communicate the differences between community committees and community boards to the community. Didn't see anything. Yeah. Okay. So you're not really helping your cause at all. And of course, information like this, or misinformation, is going to be spread quite quickly. So unless you provide us with the information, it's very difficult to make an informed decision.
All right. Do I have any questions? Nobody got any questions? All right. Thanks, Kate.
No. Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Okay,
then. All the best for lockdown.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Your Worship, we have Ross McLean in the waiting room, but Richard's not in there yet. Do you want to take him?
I will jump to Ross then. Councillors, as I said yesterday, if you want to ask a question, use the emoji. Don't put your hand up.
Page 50, submission number 2076.
Page
50.
50. Where is he? Oh, he's still connecting. Is Ross having trouble connecting, is he?
Yep.
He's probably doing it off his phone now, Ross.
I know there have been internet issues across the country because of people still working at home.
And some outages somewhere as well.
Yeah.
And potentially with this wind for rural people could make some outages as well.
Oh, Ross, can you turn your microphone on and pop in? You there, Ross?
Can you push on mute?
Can I suggest we do what we did yesterday and after the oh, there he is.
Yeah. No, I knew Ross would be on his phone. Turn your mic off. On. Ross, sorry. You can't hear us, that's the trouble. Can you hear me, Ross? Now turn your microphone on, Ross.
Can you do that, Matt? Can you turn it?
We can't turn it on for him, but we can request that he does. So he would have received some.
Turn your mic on, Ross. Can you turn your mic on, Ross?
Mayor Allen, I was going to say maybe he could just phone in without zooming in,
I don't think Zoom's the problem. Ross doesn't know how to turn his microphone on.
but if he phoned, it might be easier, perhaps.
Do you? He's turned his. Ross, do you know how to turn your microphone on?
We're just giving him a ring now.
Oh, yeah?
We'll give him an alternative method.
Just tell him to phone in. Or ask him to phone in, I should say.
Hi Ross, it's Gayleen from Waikato District Council here. Yeah, so they're trying to get you to turn your mic on. Yeah. Okay then. Okay then, bye.
Oh, here we go again. What did he say, Galen?
Right, so he's just finding his technical person so he can figure out how to turn it on.
I thought that might have been the issue.
So even
find a kid somewhere. Oh, he's found
yep,
Liam.
there you go.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Technical advisor to help you, Ross.
Oh, well, I'm proud to be a Luddite. The technology is not my thing. Alan, good morning to you all.
Good morning, Ross. Hey, look, we'll take your submission as read.
My presentation.
So you've got 10 minutes, Ross, so where you go.
Greetings from Mercer. Good morning to the councillors and the Mayor, Alan. Thank you for the opportunity to have a presentation about representations and boundaries. First, don't divide Mercer, keep it as one and as a full community. And as with the river, we don't belong anywhere else, and certainly not in the hills of the Nua, and we don't have any connection apart from the escape route when Cameron came through with the conquest of the Waikato. Kimi Mai is the original Te Wanga Waiwai before it was shipped by Caesar 100 years ago. That's why Mercer belongs to the river and its people. Trying to fit Mercer into Waikato District Council boundary plans with its population model seems to be easy way out to use Mercer to fit into a model that has divided us into a place where we don't belong. And that's why it's all about having a place that belongs to us as we belong to the area, and in particular the Waikato River. Last thing we need is a divided community as the Waikato District Council is willing to divide the north up. We get voice and its community structures and the perception of strengthening the southern representation. Community board seems to be out of balance, and in Mercer we find it hard to engage with one. Years ago we had the main board, but that has gone. There was a Mercer Community Committee which has limited resources and no real voice in an official way, and until it suits the Waikato District Council agenda. Just a warning that without a strong northern voice and representation, that Auckland, its political power and money, will take over will take this area away from the Waikato. There's already rumours and grumblings about impending takeovers in the future, whether it's true or not, but they are there. Of course, this is just a view from where I stand, and I'm unable to see the bigger picture of the future. All I can say is to consider us as your gateway to the Waikato and the last individual villages that used to make up New Zealand, with the museum going in and its historic features. We need a good representation, a strong voice to retain its history for future generations. Sometimes progress is not going forward, but keeping history to show where we have been and who we are. Thank you very much for your time. Any questions?
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate the difficulty in what you've done. So I do have one question from Councillor Henderson. Turn your microphone on, Councillor.
Yes. Do I
Jolly
switch?
thanks. Thank you, Ross, for your submission. My question is, you were mentioning community board. Would you like to see Mercer as part of one of the community board areas?
Well, we put Liam up as a candidate for the Pocono Community Board, but he was unsuccessful. And it would be nice to have be put into a boundary of community board, so we're guaranteed of a seat on the board and a voice on the board.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Church.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, hi Ross, thanks for your submission. Ross, on your written submission, you've written there's not enough representation in the north, and you've fair representation, and you've also said the councillors for the population is still too high for the north. Can you expand our understanding of what you mean, please?
With the growth, there is a proportion of the population per councillor, and with the north growing, we need to accommodate that. My concern in particular with Mercer is wanting to divide Mercer away from its true home into somewhere we don't belong, and I think we should spend more time and work on to make sure we get these balances right and the right communities get a strong voice for all.
All right, is there any other questions? Right, thanks, Ross.
Thank you, Alan.
I hope everything's going well with you up in level 4 up there. You're staying safe.
I'm busy working on my Holden. How's the Ford?
Ford's good, mate, but I still like Holdens too.
At least you're not working on them, not like my old thing. Thank you.
No. All right. Thanks, Ross. Appreciate the effort.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, work hard for us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
All right. Right. Do we have our next one?
Yeah.
Oops, no, not yet.
Oh.
Next one scheduled for 9:30, which is only a couple of minutes away.
So what's happened to Richard Haynes?
Haynes.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, Haynes.
So he was to be confirmed and he hasn't responded.
Oh, okay.
Alan, if anyone wants to know anything about community boards, sections 49 through 54 of the Local Government Act 202 is where you find information what it can, can't do for anyone that's confused.
I think the thing that I think people got confused, and it showed up yesterday, was people think there's some power, delegation and authority that goes with a board, and that's why I just said to Kate, all councils are obligated to do is provide a secretarial service, and that's basically it. This council chooses, or WBC chooses, to provide a staff member, but we're not required to provide a staff member. So that's very much also, other than that, there is no difference between a board and the community. Only it's community committee, only the differences in the way they're elected. And I would hate to think that we thought we were treating the community committees any different to the community boards, because that's certainly not how I operate.
Yes, I think, Alan, perhaps some of what we've heard referred to out of that Onefero, the pro board conversations there is a lack of trust in the relationship with council in terms of are we still going to be heard? Where in other areas where the community committees work quite well, that trust is not an issue. They know that they're effective. They can see how they've been listened to and how they're included, and as such don't need the formal, or don't feel they need the formal structure. So it's probably one that's more driven by the basic relationship between council and the community in that particular place.
Excellent.
Look, and that is actually something we actually inherited, believe it or not.
Oh yeah, I'm not just
that was there 11 years ago. That total distrust was there,
and that's where the issues with the stock bylaw were probably paramount in what we saw exercised there, and that has not gone away. And those older members that I think it was Kate, was it? She alluded to, are still pushing that barrow.
I would say it's there is some, I'm not going to mention names, but there's some identities up that way that actually foster that belief, and actually people listen to it, and that's the sad reality to it. And they were the same with Franklin too, because when I knew Mark Ball quite well, and when I spoke to Mark about some of those characters, he told me some real stories about them. So it's and they're still there. Do you want to say something, Shelley?
Yes, please. So if you weren't the mayor, would there still be the same priority for community committees as there is for community boards?
It's got nothing to do with the mayor, it's legislation.
So legislation states that community committees and community boards have the same.
No. What I meant, Shelley, is community under the Government Act, there's a process in creating a community board. And then what is our responsibility as a council to that community board? So our responsibility to that community board is to provide them support services, being secretarial services in the agenda. Other than that, there's nothing more under legislation we need to provide them. What I'm saying,
what's in legislation for community committees?
There's nothing.
See, that's what I'm saying. You acknowledge community committees the same as community boards. We all do.
Yeah.
But what if we weren't in office? What if you weren't the mayor? Would the next mayor have the same level of understanding?
Well, I'd like to think that the mayor would treat it, and it's no different than how Peter used to treat community committees and community boards. If a mayor should treat all of them equally, as I do, and the committee needs me, and I do go to a number of community committee meetings. But I suppose my time, unfortunate or not, I've seen some incredibly dysfunctional community boards, and I am yet to ever see a dysfunctional community committee. So, that's
but these people's perception is that a community committee doesn't have the same standing. We know that it does.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say to her. There is this perception they have this almighty legal power or something as a community committee, and in actual fact they don't. Anything that they have is by delegation of the council to them.
Yeah.
Righto. I'll go to Chris, then to Carolyn.
Yeah, thanks for that. It appears to me there's a lot of conflict or confusion or misinformation or whatever word you want to say between community boards, community committees, levels 1, 2, and 3. So it's something to me that's come out of this process that we need to look into, and I wonder if we should be having a workshop or a meeting or some sort of thing, and then maybe putting some rules or boundaries in and around it. And so I just like that for consideration, please.
We've tried in the past, but there's still people out there that hold a perception that one is greater than the other, and I don't think you'll ever burst that bubble. That's why I said, look, and I think probably the best example is what we call our higher tiered community committees like Tamaheri, Pokeno, TK, that who in my mind are as equally as good as any community board.
Sorry,
Yeah,
could
yeah,
I
I agree.
speak to that?
It'd be good because I know a couple of committees where they want the opportunity to become level 2 or whatever, and I just think it needs some unpacking.
Yeah. Could I make a comment, Meryl?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Chris, I absolutely endorse what you're saying, and I think it got caught up in the funding review, in effect, but it needs to pop back out of that because this is actually a representation issue, not a funding issue, in terms of community boards and committees. So we'll pop it back out, and actually the work that Galen has done in terms of those 3 tiers and the tables, etc., is a very useful way for us to communicate, to communicate kind of facts and the way it works, as opposed to historical misnomers of people's perceptions of how it works. So let's pop it out and put it on the agenda.
Right, good thought. Galen, have we got there yet, wherever you are? No, okay. Councillor Eyre.
Can I just make a comment in a nutshell? The community committees are there by the goodwill of the council. The community boards are prescribed through legislative requirements.
It's not of the goodwill of the councillor. It's the goodwill of the community to have a community committee. It's got nothing to do with council. It's just that we recognise.
There's if the council, as Shelley had mentioned, if council decide to do away with the community committee, there's no reason they can't. They can do away with one, unlike a community board.
Councillor Smith. Turn your microphone on.
Sorry, it comes down to the status of community boards, and they're not an incorporated body. They're not a committee of council. Powers of the community board are in section 53, and they include what's delegated by the territorial authority or prescribed by order in council. And those powers expire after 6 years automatically. So there's probably a misunderstanding by maybe some of us, and particularly amongst the community board members and members of the community. So it may actually be an education program, certainly for the next election, in the package that goes out, as to what the powers are, what the relationships are, and the likes are, because misinformation has obviously been quite destructive, as I'm beginning to feel at the moment. So, and some people may never accept what the reality really is, but unless we put it in front of people, it's probably not going to help in any way. So I think we need a little bit of work. It's probably in fairness, as Matt signaling now, I just think that we need to do a little bit more, and we can put the information, like the old story, put a horse in front of where you can't make it drink, but at least you've done the best you can. Thanks.
Thank you. Galen, still not here?
Yes, they are. So it's Andrew Caldwell, submission number 1970, page 167. And just on the community committee, I picked up the point that there does need to, we have got the basis of a schedule to discuss it, so we can set something up to actually really get the details of what you want.
Yeah, okay, cool. Andrew, can you turn your microphone on, Andrew?
Good morning.
I see you've got an IT manager too.
A little bit flustered. We've only literally just got on as you came on, so.
Oh, that's all right, Andrew. So just so you know, take your submission as read. So we've read it all. We've got it in front of us here. You've got 10 minutes, which includes any questions that the councillors may want to go. So I'll let you lead off for the next 10 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to chat to you all. I live right in Glenmurray, right beside the Glenmurray Hall. These new boundaries are going to split our community right in half. It goes right down the middle of our community. I was at a meeting at the Pukekawa Hall where the chap who designed all these these boundaries, new ones, I asked about consultation, and he said they'd been out to the communities and consulted fully with them. we're a pretty strong rural community. We live right on the boundary of Port Waikato and had no consultation whatsoever. This has hit us from left of field, totally unaware. And basically, and the boundary actually goes right through the middle of my farm on an old paper road. So I don't quite know how that works. We're a strong community. We have every Friday night, we have a minimum of 50 people turning up to a potluck dinner that we provide the dinner for to the community, minimum of $5. We also have a tennis centre there where we have a business house of minimum of 24 people turning up, you know, all through the summer months. So what I'm trying to say is we've got a really strong community here in Glen Murray, and just don't feel that we've been consulted on the new boundaries that you've given in. We've got a great representative councillor in Carolyn Eyre, and suddenly she's gone. We've got nothing in common with the southern boundary of the new ward, right down to the east of Hamilton. We've got nothing in common with those people. Our big issues out here are roading, and we have a lot in common with Port Waikato in that regard. We have State Highway 22 running right through the middle of us, and you know, as you guys know, that is a tricky road to maintain, and it's in a pretty bad state at the moment. What else was I going to say? I'm ranting on here a bit.
That's all right.
Oh, the other thing was representation, where you've given the towns the ability to represent themselves in community boards, but in your prospectus, all you've offered the rural communities are committees. Well, my understanding, and I'm happy to be corrected, is that there's no legal obligation of you guys to listen to committees, whereas there is to boards. So we would like that opportunity, and I understand it's in the process, but of making committees able for the district council, to listen to committees and obligated to listen to our things, because we just feel we're going to miss out on funding and all of those things for our community projects. And I think that's, you know, I think that's really important. It's possibly something that you could change, hopefully. And the other part is, I just don't, and it's nothing to do with me, but I don't understand why north of the Waikato River, the Aka area is hooked into Port Waikato. I don't think they've got anything in common with us. I'd much rather be hooked into Turkey. I'm sure that's where they go. And I understand there's caches or whatever it is to block for your numbers and your population things, but I'd say there's a big issue with Pukekawa. They've been cut out as well, and they, I feel, would be better represented hooked in with us. Anyway, I'm going to cut short of 10 minutes. If there's any questions, that's all I've got to say.
That's all right. Look, Andrew, I raised this with the last submitter in relation to legal requirement to listen to community committees versus community boards. We listen to everybody, and there is no legal requirement for us to listen to a community board any more than a community committee. So I think that's been, somebody has led you up the garden path on that.
I heard
our obligation is to listen. Yeah, so our obligation is to listen to everybody. Doesn't matter whether on a community board, a community committee, a hall committee, a PTA, a play centre, no matter what. We listen to everybody equally. So nobody gets any more preference than another. And anybody that says that is actually not understanding what the process is, unfortunately.
Okay, well, that's good to have that clarification, because one of your consultants at the Pukekawa Hall specifically said that there was it's under the government.
Yeah, what that is, Andrew, under the Local Government Act, it's actually how it's formed. One's formed under legislation, the other's not formed under legislation. Doesn't give it any more authority than one from the other.
Okay, so I'll take your word on that.
Yeah, well, you can do, because we've got 28, I think, community committees, only 5 community boards. So I think probably most people have realised that community committees are easier to work in than a board.
Right.
Hey, look, you've got time for anybody that's got any questions. While I'm thinking about who they are, what's the weather like up there? Blowing like it is down here on the other side of the lake?
Yeah, it's pretty heinous. I'm glad to be inside. I could be here for an hour if you want.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be in here until 9 o'clock tonight, and I don't really want to be here till 9. I'll probably be down the farm, to be honest.
Yeah. All I want to say is, Alan, you know, if the boundary came right down the middle of Rotanara or Wara, wherever you are, you know, you wouldn't be happy about that. I just don't think, I mean, we weren't consulted. I just find that hard to believe. Being Glen Murray, we're not a small community. We've got one of the better maintained rural halls in your electorate, and not a word of it. So I just find that a bit disappointing and a bit perplexing.
Look, Andrew, thank you for your submission, because if people like you don't stand up and highlight those issues in relation to splitting of communities, it's always hard when we're trying to do it, because we don't work off roads, we work off mesh blocks, the same as central government does. And sometimes mesh blocks fall in the most horrible of places. So it's not easy, but by you raising that through your submission, it gives us premise to go back and look at it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
No, thank you, Andrew.
Okay.
See ya.
Right.
Right, we've got our next one waiting for us.
Submitter number 1969, Edgar Henson, page 169.
Yeah. Are you there, Edgar? Turn your microphone on. Yep. Can you turn it on, Edgar?
Right,
Yeah.
I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted. You're on. Welcome.
Right, well, good morning to all of you. And
So you just know, Edgar, you've got 10 minutes, which includes any questions from the councillors. So the next 10 minutes are yours. So knock your socks off and take your submission as read.
so I start first. That's what you're saying, Helen?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, the serious issue is urban is not sharing the load. And if this is a democracy, it's showing it's not a democracy. Urban is getting democracy, but rural is not. There should be community boards in all wards. And basically to say in that ward which I'm in is, what is it called? Waikato, isn't it, or something?
Right,
say that goes from Aka to Te Akau, and basically the councillor would have to work 36 hours a day to do a proper job. And basically that's stupid. And basically, Caroline, I don't know how many miles you want to run every year if you are the councillor. And so what I believe is this council approving this as councillors don't know what democracy is. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should look at a different model, and I've proposed one. Some of you wouldn't, of course, be there if you go down to 6 general ward councillors elected, on a general list, but that's life. And you're saying, well, it's life at the moment for us rural people. We're going to take away your democracy and not have a local board. So basically, it's a bit dumb. There's north of this TA is Auckland Council. 20 community boards for 1.7 million. So what's wrong down south? You don't want democracy, right? Well, what do? Start a rates revolt, do we? Put the rates into a fighting fund? What do you want? Because I'm sick of this sort of system that people don't understand democracy. And basically, if you look up north, and I said to them, I think it's the Far North Council changed theirs. And that's something you as a council should be looking at and seeing how that's working. I hope I've got the right council. I didn't have time to sort out whether it was the Far North Council, but I'm pretty sure it is the Far North Council. And that apparently is working very well along the lines pretty well of what I've said, reduce the number of councillors and increase the number of community boards and make democracy and connection to the community important. Now, what a lot of you may or may not realise is farming is under attack. It's getting one change after the other thrown at it. And basically what you're saying is we are disinterested and we don't want to be connected to you. Well, that's disgusting. Farming, rural, in the last 30 years has been the innovation centre of New Zealand, and it will continue to do so. The billions thrown at hokey pokey things has not produced growth for New Zealand. But farming with innovation and change, without even this present change, has continued producing wealth. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, for supporting Ohiniwai, because I think that was dumb for the other council not wanting to do it. Because basically we've got to keep going and growing in a sustainable, productive way, but growing. Or otherwise, what's going to happen in the future? You want to end up somewhat different model to Venezuela or something? I don't know. But you got to have democracy. And the other thing about what I'm saying about those community boards, that's a good way of getting diversity into the political system rather than a small number. So if you want better diversity, which is really about ideas, it's not about ethnicity or whatever, it's about getting people with ideas on board to actually contribute. And that's what's needed in all organizations. Not same old, protect your patch system, which this proposal you guys have agreed to is showing. So I think it's wake up time for you. Or are you worried? Is there a worry in you? You're protecting your patch. So perhaps this is the last couple of terms. The United Waikato Council comes along. No more Waikato District Council. Is that the worry from some of you? So you just want to have a position so you can promote yourself for that. You don't like what I'm saying, ponder on it, because this is what it's showing. This is what it's showing in so much of what you have agreed to as councillors. To deny me and the rest of us rural people of basic democracy in this TA. That's all I've got to say, Mr. Mayor.
That's all right, Edgar, no problem. Hey, can I just clarify a point? And I've written it down here, I think, in looking at your submissions. So your point is around that there should only be 6 wards and 6 councillors. Is that
well,
what
no, they're not in wards. They're general councillors.
Yeah.
On a general.
Oh, okay. So that's at large. What we call it large. The main thrust of mine is
the local boards and make those local boards work. Look, let's say some local boards will work better than others. That's life. But you've got the ability to have a good, well-supported local board system, which actually connects with the communities they're in, and actually, as I said, is a gateway for better diversity of ideas and people and coming into the system as well, rather than what's proposed.
Okay, thanks, Edgar. I'll go to Councillor Beck, who hasn't asked a question this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Henson. In fact, you went some way to answering my question in that last bit. So basically, as I understand it, you see a small number of councillors, 6 who are elected at large in order to do the governance part of the business, but the local democracy and representation, the heavy lifting, comes actually from a board structure, as I understand you. I guess my question is how do you see those boards, well, how local do the local boards need to be? What sort of areas of communities of interest should they represent in order for democracy to actually work?
Well, I'm saying in our ward, which is proposed, which is going from Aka Aka to Te Akau, and basically no community board, but a community board in that would have a reasonable chance of representation of a number of people across the ward. So in an ideal world, you'd have someone spread from the north to the south, say 6 board members. I'm not sure, 5 board members, but that's a lot better, got a lot better ability to connect with the communities than one councillor in that ward. And you've got to, well, there's so many community activities, community issues, community problems that come up. Well, your proposal is that there's one councillor in that ward to handle all that. Well, the person, like, it's just unrealistic. And that's why I say it's undemocratic. It's not actually proposing a workable, a workable system that actually can deliver to the community and deliver to the council. Unless you have those community boards.
All right.
And as I said about Auckland, Auckland's got 1.7 million with 20 community boards, 20 councillors, but I don't see we need I'm really saying we can't afford the community board and that number of councillors. So my proposal is drop the number of councillors and don't have them ward represented and have them on a general list. And I've got no problem. I haven't objected to the 2 Maori councillors. I haven't objected to that. But I do think that for democracy, we've got to have community boards in all wards.
Okay, thanks, Edgar. Well, one quick question from Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much for your submission, Edgar. You're probably aware that in part the community boards are funded through a targeted rate. If we had a majority of those that we consulted on paying for that targeted rate for the benefit of a community board, so in essence, they're not prepared to pay for it, but they want it, how do you think we'd overcome that? Just as you say, strengthen democracy.
Well, what is interesting, I've got my rate notices in front of me, and I get 3 rate notices, one for the dwelling where I'm sitting now, and 2 for the or one for a hectare around the dwelling, and 1 for over the road. Well, those 2, you say farm ones, of course, just a general rate. So you come to the house, and apparently the house is paying $23.12 for the Oniwero Tuakau Community Board. Now, I actually look at those other 2 and say, well, that, again, the urban part of the property, which is the house, is actually paying, it's paying for the rubbish collection and the hall as well. But apparently the farm gets no benefit of those. Now, you look at your rating system, and perhaps it's time to look at what actually is rural connected and costs, and actual urban or housing collected costs. But that's a different issue. That's not today's issue. But I think it's all intermingled anyhow, because it's got to be paid for. But really, what I'm really saying is, I don't have any rural issues because I'm not paying anything for the Oniwero Tuakau Community Board. I only have urban issues for the house. Well, that's a bit funny too. So there's a question mark there of should some of this be looked at, and I've got no problem of talking or submitting on further on that. Yeah.
Okay, look, thanks, Edgar.
Thank you.
Time's up. I'll let you go. Appreciate you making the effort to make a submission and come online with us.
Well, thank you, Alan, and look, good luck to your board coming to a sensible decision on this.
I did like your idea about 6 councillors, though.
Well, I know it's hard at times to look at yourself and put the self-interest out of the way and put the community in front, but that's what needs to happen.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Edgar.
Rightio, bye.
Righto, everybody, we've got our next submitter, Bruce Cameron, representing Fed Farmers. What page were they on?
So they were the email that was sent out. They're attached. Their full submission was not part of the agenda. That was the one that I sent out under separate cover.
All right. Okay, so hang on. Let them in.
It's email on the 5th of the 9th from Galen.
And it's Hilary Walker with Bruce Cameron.
Fifth of 9th, that was last Sunday, wasn't it? Right. Okay. Morning, Hilary.
Morning, morning, Ms Hanson. How are you?
Good.
Good.
Okay, so I've got your submission in front of us. You've got 10 minutes, including any questions. I didn't see Bruce here. Hi, Bruce. How are you?
Very good.
So that's 10 minutes, and that includes any questions.
Just what I could add there, basically, I'm following on after this, and then
It's 10 minutes per submission, Bruce. So let's deal with this one first.
Okay, so be it. Okay, I'll add here, Federated Farmers welcomes the opportunity to present, and I'll, on that basis, I'll hand it over to Hilary Walker, who is our Senior Policy Advisor and is very experienced throughout New Zealand in putting these submissions together to councils, and so I'll hand it over to Hilary.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Bruce. I will just add that I'll put Don Cole's apologies in. He's our North Waikato chair. But yeah, so cutting to the point, you'll be aware that we do represent farmers across this district. They are people who live, work and play and here, and as such, they expect us to submit on their behalf with these matters. So we had two key points really in our submission. The first one was that we support a ward system and want to ensure that ward boundaries accurately represent communities of interest. However, we did have some concerns that the proposed reworked boundaries failed to achieve that and will in fact separate rather than connect communities. And the second point was that we strongly oppose the proposed changes to remove rural communities from the community board boundaries. So to turn our attention first to the community board issue, and within that there was two key concerns that we had. One related to the proposal itself, and the other was the lack of consultation with affected rural communities on that proposal. So the proposal to refocus the boards to provide support and resource to urban communities landed pretty hard. It created a sense of division and inequity where there was none previously. The consultation material didn't provide any meaningful explanation as to why council considered it appropriate to enable urban boards, but not rural ones. And it was difficult to follow the point that was made about rural groups or how those unspecified groups can or would be enabled to perform the statutory functions of community boards. Without having those same functions and powers, there is no like for like, and that made it difficult to understand why it was considered a valid and a genuine equitable option for rural ratepayers to consider. Now, those same frustrations exist with council putting up a community committee option in the feedback survey as an alternative for community boards for rural representation. The key differences between boards and communities was not explained. And as such, we felt you asked people to commit to make important decisions without providing meaningful information and a clear understanding of the consequences. The actual like-for-like option would be to have a new rural community board that would be established alongside the urban one, but no information was provided as to what that criteria would be, how that could be established, and what the funding implications would be. Council advised on page 21 of the statement of proposal that you would meet with relevant rural communities during the submission period to discuss the proposal more broadly, but we don't know of any specific consultation that took place. It certainly didn't occur with Federated Farmers. And we also disagree with the resolution passed at the 7th of July council meeting, which stated that the proposed changes to the current representation arrangements will provide effective and accessible representation to rural communities of interest, or that the changes to the boards are minor and were required to reflect growth in the respective communities and ensure effective representation of those communities. In our view, the only equitable option, was to either retain the status quo or to establish a rural community to sit alongside the ones that were being proposed. So moving on to the proposed ward boundaries, and we just want to make it clear that our drive to have as much rural representation in council as possible does not stem from a misguided attempt to create favouritism or bias. We are fully aware of the oath councillors take to represent all people within the district fairly and equitably once elected. Our unapologetic goal is to have rural representation on council to provide rural perspectives, connection and knowledge, but also because we believe that those rural councillors can provide a skill set and knowledge base learnt from running multi-million-dollar businesses with lots of moving parts as being essential to good governance. In our view, rural councillors bring skills and insight to the table which benefit the entire district. So as mentioned, we do support a ward system, but have concerns that some of the proposed boundaries are artificial or seem too large to be a true representation of communities of interest. So the key points around that was, we thought the Port Waikato inclusion of Aka Aka which has no real community of interest with the south side of the Waikato River. On the western side of the Waikato River, north of Lake Whangapai, has no community of interest with the rest of the proposed Wairanga Hukanui ward. And it is likely that that northern part of the ward up to the Firth of Thames has no community of interest with the southern part of the ward, which goes down to Tamahiri. We also think that the Raglan ward has significantly encroached into the Te Ako district and does not share a common community of interest. In our view, the proposed ward boundaries have been too heavily influenced by the mesh blocks. And whilst we understand the purpose of that plus or minus 10% threshold, we know that that's to ensure councillors represent roughly the same number of people in the district. But there is discretion to breach that range should it be required to ensure communities of interest are fairly and effectively represented. Now, we provided some examples of changes to the boundaries in our submission, which we thought could be made to better reflect communities of interest and the natural geographical boundaries. So that really sums up, I guess, the key points we wanted to raise, and we are open to questions.
Thanks, Hilary. Appreciate it. Good submission too. Look, I just want to say one thing. I want you to be assured that when I set this in train, which was nearly 15 months ago, I made it clear to the team that started it off and then to the wider councillors that I wanted to protect the rights of the rural community. Now, just so you understand, I am a rural person myself, a farmer. So when I first came on council 19 years ago, it was made up of 8 farmers and 4 butchers, believe it or not, but that was the makeup of the councillor. But what I've always tried to do, and I think the councils at large have tried to do, is protect the farmers, not the farmers, but the rural community, because it's not just about farmers anymore. It's about a number of other people that live within the rural area. So we have worked hard to try and do that. The problem we do have is around mesh blocking, which doesn't give us any easy way around it. We have to use those mesh blocks. There's no other option other than to use them. But sometimes we come up with some quirky things. So I do appreciate what you've highlighted. You're not the first to highlight that, and you can be assured that that the councillors will, in deliberations, take all of that into considerations.
Thank you, Worship. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Councillor Eyre. And you got about 30 seconds.
Thank you for yep. Thank you, and thank you for the submission. Just have you considered that having 2 councillors for the one community that is divided may be beneficial for that community?
So which community are we talking about? The one that has the community board issue?
For argument's sake, if you look at Glen Murray, that is under this proposal divided, you would have 2 councillors basically advocating for Glen Murray. Have you considered the benefits of that?
Could I add in there, Hilary? Good point, Caroline, but it depends very much where those councillors come from. The population numbers are greater in the south, that they could both come from down there.
Yep.
Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you. In adopting this initial proposal, we were actually very conscious of the rural voice and tried to protect that by the way the wards were shaped. And so I'm just wondering if you feel like we didn't actually get to those communities as part of developing that initial proposal. And we did run a number of sessions online as well as in rural communities. I think, Bruce, you were at the one at Pukekohe yourself. What else should we have done in order to more publicise or make more available the opportunities for input?
Well, the only thing I just want to ask is that it would have been great if we'd have been contacted directly to have, to help get that message out and help get that message out. Bruce may speak to the fact, don't get me wrong, we know farmers can be difficult to connect with. I mean, in this time of the year, it's just notoriously hard. But having a public meeting, in our view, is better than those face-to-face drop-in sessions. I know that they are relatively popular, but farmers do enjoy bouncing ideas off each other. I know there's not always high turnout, but the beauty of a public meeting is that, yeah, people get to have some sense of security and commonality, I guess, and coming together and get to bounce ideas off each other. Yeah, rather than those relatively individual, well, they are individual, those face-to-face ones. But yeah, I'll let you have your say, Bruce.
Well, I think if the point you make there, Councillor Beck, is if you'd actually carried out what your proposal went out with and said you were going to contact those rural communities. And I mean, I see it's been mentioned Zoom meetings and that, but I heard nothing of them and knew nothing of them, and their chair and other committees around here knew nothing of those meetings. So I don't know what format they went out in. In that drop-in session at Pukekohe, and it was just a drop-in session, it was only to discuss what was put on the table, not other options. So, and Hilary mentions rural, you know, meetings in that Pukekohe meeting, when it was part of Franklin, there would be more attend that meeting than all the other meetings that the Franklin District Council used to have combined. So there's always been a strong voice out in this area, but it's not being tapped into, and having a drop-in session doesn't engage with that community at all. You need full public meetings, and that's what we used to have before.
The trouble is, Bruce, is that people, you may say that, but someone down the road say, okay, we have a public meeting at 7 o'clock. Christ, I only get them from the farm at 6:30. I got to have dinner and that. I'm not coming to a meeting at 7 o'clock. And we get a whole lot of conflict. So the idea of drop-in is we're there for 3 hours or so. It gives everybody, no matter what time frame they have to come to it. So there's pluses and minuses in both. I probably prefer a public meeting personally myself, but that's only my view. But I've heard all angles on this, and we try our hardest as an organisation through many work streams to communicate. And I've got to say, it's the bloody hardest thing out is to communicate with people who do not want to communicate with you. Some do, some don't. I always say if we were putting the rates up by 30%, everybody'd come out. Put them up by 3%, 1 or 2 turn up. You know, and this is what we're up against all the time.
No, I appreciate that. So that's just, and I guess that's why we can actually help with the communicate or getting out to the, you know, communicating information. So like I say, we weren't treated as any particular stakeholder or someone with a, or a group with some particular knowledge in the space. And I guess that's, yeah, that's a little bit frustrating, because I think we could have helped in that regard.
So look, Bruce, you've gone way over time, you and Hilary, but what I'm going to do, because you do have a couple of submissions to follow, Bruce, do you want to continue this conversation on with Hilary there, even though the the next two are your submissions from the community group and that? You want to do it that way? I'll leave the floor open for another quarter of an hour or so and use that time up for that purpose, or do you want to go out and come back in?
No, more than happy to carry on, and more than happy for Hilary to sit there, because she can probably, you know, if any questions come up, she's got the expertise in this area than what I have. So look, I'll carry on with my submission.
Yeah.
I thank you very much for this opportunity to in support of my submission. It's obviously I'm Bruce Cameron, not what comes up on my screen as Yvonne. And I've lived in the Glen Murray area and have done so for 50 plus years. I've been involved in the district, be it school committee, school board, Glen Murray Hall committee, that's for 45 plus years. Currently chairman of Franklin sub-province of Federated Farmers, which is essentially South Auckland, and served on the OTCB, and served my last term as chairman. I was part of the focus group at Pokeno in October last year, representing Federated Farmers. In your booklet, you put out for consultation on this review on page 3, it states, 1, to identify the district's community of interests, 2, to ensure the communities of interest are effectively represented, and 3, to ensure those communities of interest are fairly represented. I've gone through the summary of the Reshape Waikato notes and seriously wonder whether any of the feedback was considered when you drew up the proposal that you have come up with, and especially those 3 points above, whether you've taken them into account. Communities of interest. In the proposed Port Waikato ward, you have split Te Akau clean in half, pretty much the same for Glen Murray, and then adding Ark into the Port Waikato ward. In discussion with residents at Te Akau, not those on the harbour's edge, they don't see themselves as part of Raglan and object to having their community split the way you have done. Glen Murray is stated as being in the Port Waikato ward, but 3/4 of the main street is actually in the Whangarei Hukanui General Ward and has very little contact with the vast bulk of Wairanga Hukanui ward and definitely none with the southern part of the ward. Aka Aka has no or virtually no contact with the proposed rest of the Port Waikato ward that it's been lumped in with. A community of interest is a community that people associate with most, as stated on page 27 of the document you put out for consultation. I go back to the Reshape Waikato notes and actually believe you put that totally aside and focus purely on mesh blocks and very little else. Community boards. Reading through the Reshape Waikato notes, community boards come up a lot. Quote, community boards are popular forms of local representation in area, and the area they cover could be increased. Some consideration to be given to the establishment of rural community boards. Quote again, the community's preferred form of government, of local government representation were community boards 55% and 73% said the council should continue to have community boards. As I said, community boards come up quite a lot more, but I haven't got time to go through each one. So what have you come up with in your proposal? Same number of community boards, but taken the rural portion out of the OTCB and said the community boards are for urban areas only, but you have left the large rural portion of the Raglan ward intact of the community board. Please show consistency because it actually makes a mockery of the proposal. No legislation that I know states that community boards are for urban areas only and rural areas are only entitled to the reduced status of a community committee. There is also no reason for a community board cannot cross a ward boundary, even though you state that you do not wish this to happen. They only need to stay within mesh blocks and be connected. Turkey has a wish to be its own community board. I have my doubts about this as the board has always been a very strong community board. Maybe there's been the interaction of both rural and urban that has made this board work. Both sectors have needed each other and it's sad to see a couple of members in the Turkey wishing to break this up. In light of this happening, I would support Turkey having its own board, but only if a new board is formed in the rural part of the OTCB. This can be easily done as they already pay a targeted rate. This board can also extend further south and cover the remainder of the proposed Port Waikato ward. The extension can take place after necessary consultation has taken place, the targeted rate. We would have a genuine rural community board, quite simple really, and all parties happy. I question the population numbers used and I see reference to that in other submissions. I have concerns about the extrapolation of the numbers from the last census. I also fully support Rosemary Costa's submission, well thought out and well presented. Open for questions.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Right, any questions, anybody? So look, I'll ask a question while some might think about a question, Bruce. So as part of this process, there's no good reason, considering it's been raised a number of times, that we couldn't create a second community board for that rural area, as you've outlined in your submission, and as others have actually raised that same issue with us. Probably the issue is how do we separate the funding between the two that's currently in place? And we had a discussion with somebody a little bit earlier on around the targeted rate and what that targeted rate portion would be that came away from the OTC current board would be based on the amount that's actually paid now, and not so much amount based on the residential addresses where that's generated from. Would you have any issue with that?
No, the board would be divided. The boundary would be the river, which I take it the mesh blocks. I don't know whether they cross the river or not. And a new board would be formed. The amount of the targeted rate, it would just go to the new board.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. Councillor Willerton.
Thank you. Yeah, very good submissions. Very interesting to hear. And sort of it's probably keeps coming up, the division between the board at Onefero and Turkau. Onefira, it's certainly coming across that Onefira wants to stay with Tuakau and Tuakau wants to separate. So that's something that's coming across very strongly for us. So it's sort of going to be hard to make a decision because we've got directly opposing views. It doesn't matter which way we go. As a council, we're going to be saying we're not listening to one. So that's something I think needs to be aware of. But then the second part is that you're happy to have a board, and in that, what I don't like about the board is the fact is the cost structure that runs with it. And so, are you aware of how much more it costs compared to a committee, and the benefit that then that money could then go straight to the community rather than into running the board?
I'm aware of the cost of running a board. The thing is, we know a board structure. There is no proposal put up of what a committee would look like, and I understand that is something the council wants to work in the future. So we cannot say we'll take a committee and trust that we'll like what structure of a committee the council comes up with. So that's why probably we're going for a board now, because we know legislatively how it runs. Splitting the board, basically the numbers who are supporting the board in Tuakau, having a Tuakau board is actually very small, but for some unknown reason they've been given tremendous weight, as opposed to, as you point out, I'll say the other side of the river support staying with a community board. But I think it's also come through in the submissions that if there is going to be a split, probably not too much of an issue. But we have a community board on this side of the river, and they have their own. And I don't think there's any, from the council's perspective, you've listened.
No, can I just add just one quick point? So yeah, it's a good point you make, Councillor Woollerton. I guess the only thing I'd like to add is that it wouldn't, if a committee is good enough for the rural communities, then why would the change not be for urban as well? Like I guess our point is that it's either committees for everyone or boards for everyone, to get that like for like and that equity in there. Otherwise, it's really difficult to compare, I think. That's
so look, just on that, Hilary, and I think probably what Councillor Wellington probably was trying to get out and didn't quite get all the way there was currently a previous submitter, and I thought it was about $18.70, but he tells us off his rate bill this morning that the Onefira Tuakau Community Board fee is, and it will be for all our community boards, is $23.12 at the moment in total. So that only pays part of running a community board. So perhaps what Councillor Wellington was saying is, if that targeted rate to run a community board in the area was $45 or $50, how would that community still feel about a community board?
Right.
I think my answer to that is, that's not just this board. If the board is formed here, that's over all the boards. So
yes, it is. It's over all boards, Bruce. It's not. It would be a change, and I think probably, in all fairness, because it's been raised around the fact that why aren't boards paying for themselves? So at the moment, as a general ratepayer, I'm paying for 5 community boards. Yet I have no influence, no input into those at all, but I'm paying for it. Yeah. So democracy comes at a price. We have 28 community committees that don't cost us much at all. They certainly don't cost us the amount of money it costs to run a community board. So we've got to look at fairness and equity here too.
Yeah, no, fully agree with that. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Beck.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to, I guess, link across the Federated Farmers as well as your own submission on this point. Would there not be an argument, in your view, in favour of splitting away from the Tuakau in order to have a more clear rural voice? That's then a committee made up of like-minded people, rather than trying to manage that urban-rural mix within the existing board.
I support that, and as I think I stated there, I support a split and having a rural board, and also it expanding beyond the boundaries of the existing Onefira Community Board, and because then you've got a much more rural voice. And then that board, the setup of it, could also look at potentially doing wards within that board, so that we get coverage in the a fair coverage from the south and the north or whichever way. And I think it could be created as a very good example of creating a rural board to support the rural councillor, not just our councillor currently, Councillor Eyre, but the voice of a lot of rural issues which are the same. And I appreciate, and I heard the Mayor say the other day that the councillor and the boards don't always agree. And that's, I see as normal, because the council has got to look at not just the area that the board covers, but the whole area. So it's accepted that the councillor and the board are not always on the same page, but that's democracy.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bruce, because what happens is, and I've seen it for years and years, that the councillor's responsibility is at the district at large, and sometimes that's in conflict with how the board feels. And I've seen councillors lambasted by their boards because they didn't agree with their view, and yet their job is to look at the overall picture. So it's really hard for some councillors in that respect. Last question is Councillor Church.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Yvonne and Hilary. My question, you touched on funding, a bit around this board idea. So at the moment, the community boards are district-wide funding, which means the targeted rate for the Āniwhera Community Board goes into a pool to and to help supplement the whole of the boards. How do you feel in terms of if you have a targeted rate for funding around the board, where that money should be allocated to?
Well, it's going to be allocated to that board, the board that's formed, exactly the same as it is now. The Turkey and all the boards, they get their funding and it comes to it. And I also appreciate there's quite a percentage comes out of the general rate as well. Now, if refunding of the boards that they self-fund totally by a targeted rate, so be it. In theory, on that basis, the general rate should drop accordingly.
All right, so just to clarify. Yes, just to clarify. So when it's district-wide, then the targeted money for the Āniwhera Community Board helps to fund all of those community boards, because it's a very large community board. Others are a lot smaller. And obviously then there's a general rate on top. So you'd anticipate that if there was a new model around funding, that if there's money targeted rated to a community board, whoever they are, that they manage their funds within their community board rather than spreading it district-wide. That's what I'm trying to understand when you're talking about funding and targeted rates.
I know there's quite a bit of crossover with the way the boards are funded with that $23.12. It doesn't necessarily all come into this board, into the Āniwhera Turkey board. There's a bit of cross-pollinisation that's taking place here. And maybe with the revamp of the funding criteria, we would get more clarity so that the targeted rate in each board area would actually go to each board. But I think that's a discussion to come out in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Thank you, Bruce, Hilary. Time's up. Done really well. I think it worked really well putting them all together, even though I've been trying to kind of slice and dice them individually. But I think Bruce's following submission sort of supported Federated Farmers' view, so I just thought it was easier to leave them both together like that. So
thank you.
I appreciate the effort in that, and it's great to see you. And thank you very much for making the time.
Can I add, I've still got the Community Association one sitting here too.
Where's that one?
That's part of mine. It's there's two submissions that come together with me.
Well, Bruce, you've had half an hour, mate. I'd said I'd put them all together.
Yeah, well, but as you said, you just
more time doesn't mean more questions.
No, but this is the Glen Murray Community Association presentation, which
I've got a list down here. It says Bruce Cameron and the Glen Murray Community Association, 10 to 10:30, and that's what we've just had, Bruce.
Okay, well, look, I'd reiterate what Andrew Caldwell said then, that there was no consultation done. Yeah, I think in the statement that rural communities have committees, so they could use those, but they're very specific, and which is no different to the urban communities have exactly the same. But anyway, okay, leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Bye.
Rightio, councillors, we're going to adjourn for half an hour. Correct, Aileen?
Oh, yes. You're on mute, your
Yeah, I
worship.
know, I'll turn myself off. Yeah, so everybody go and have a cup of tea or whatever you need, and we'll get back at 11 o'clock.